Welcome to Charting New Paths in Pre-K through 12 Education, a podcast by Solution Tree. In our authors segment, we invite our new and best-selling authors published by Solution Tree to share their expertise and valuable insights with you. Listen to this segment and add another tool in your toolbox of research-affirmed, classroom-ready strategies to improve student outcomes. I'm your host, Prisma Lopez-Marine. Enjoy today's episode. Hello everyone, in today's episode, the book we'll be talking about is titled Student Self-Assessment, Data, Notebooks, Portfolios, and Other Tools to Advance Learning. The book outlines how to plan and implement various self-assessment strategies to ensure student growth at all grade levels. We are joined by the author of this book, Katie White. She spends her days working to transform the educational experience for teachers and students. She also has been an integral part of her own school system's multi-year journey through educational reform and has assisted systems worldwide in their work toward approaches that honor learning relationships. Katie, thank you for joining me for this episode.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Can you share with us about your current role in education, as well as being an educational consultant?
Sure. So I'll frame my role this way. First of all, I'm a thinker. So I spend lots of my days thinking. And that kind of manifests in books and blogs and articles. So I do lots of writing. I'm also a teacher. And so certainly in my consultation means that I get to work with adults a lot, but I also substitute teach still if my school division needs me, which they seem to a little bit these days. And last year I taught an online class or two high school classes. So I still think of myself as a teacher and a leader. And then I am a wrestler. So what I mean is I wrestle with how to make big ideas tangible and accessible to people. And so I do that through my work as a coordinator of learning for my own school division here in Saskatchewan. And I'm also the president of the Canadian Assessment for Learning Network. So we explore assessment and how it advances learning. And so that's kind of how I spend my days, thinking, teaching, and wrestling.
I really thought, I was like, wow, where does she fit that in? It's a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if you did kickboxing or something to the effect, just as stress relief. Tell us more about why you said in your book that you acknowledged that this book was written on Treaty 6 territory in Canada. In your book, you express that as a Canadian and as part of your commitment to truth and reconciliation. I love that. You would like to express gratitude for the treaties, which have allowed you to live and work as a guest on this land, which I thought was such an incredibly humble way of just giving homage to a great community that you're part of, also, which is the land, that traditional homeland of Indigenous peoples of Saskatchewan, past and present.
Yeah. And I was really excited that you noticed that because, it just is sort of sitting there in the front of the book, but it means a lot to me. So what I did is officially called a land acknowledgement, and it's an Indigenous protocol. Indigenous people since time immemorial have acknowledged the land on which they live, work, and play. They acknowledge their relationship with the land. And so in 2015, Canada embarked on something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where the truth of residential schools and the impact on children past and present was voiced all the way across Canada. It took years for people to tell their stories. And that commission came up with several calls to action. And as a result of all of that, in Canada, a lot of the time, even when we're presenting or if you're at a public event, so every day when I work within Canada, I do a land acknowledgement at the beginning to acknowledge that I am a guest on this land, that I am privileged to be here, that I in no way own this place. I'm just here, and that I'm very, very lucky to be here. And so that's why I did that. I also wrote the book when I was camping with my husband, and we were up in northern Canada and amid the trees and the lakes. And I just felt a very strong connection to the land while I was writing it. And so I just really wanted to say that. And that's why it's there.
Just so much passion is in this book. Obviously, very strategic, very thorough thoughts, but also it's just you just can tell that it's just very, very a lot of passion for education. We did have a previous conversation about self-care being essential for teachers. So how do you continue to incorporate self-care in your own work? And then also, how can self-care for teachers connect with this book and the concept of setting goals?
So another great question. For me, self-care has been challenging my whole life. I think I shared with you before that I have always been one of those people who did things to care for myself when I was done my work. So it always came at the end, and so then it rarely came. And over the pandemic, and then just all of the changes that have happened, in my kids leaving home, and there's just all kinds of things, I really started to prioritize it. So whether I'm traveling or whether I'm at home, I've started to put self-care as part of my practice, my everyday planning. It comes right at the beginning of the day. And I have to do it so that I can bring my best self to the work that I do. And it's just really been a paradigm shift. So it's interesting that you've connected it to the book because I turned to a quote, and I'm not going to get the quotation exactly right, but it's James Clear says it in his book, Atomic Habits. He talks about how intensity makes a good story, but consistency is what really makes progress. And so what I've noticed in myself is that I've given myself permission to just set a habit every day of going for a long walk and then being outside and enjoying the fresh and often very cold Canadian air. And I'm not pushing myself to do anything crazy, but it's just a consistent habit. And because it's a habit and I've made time for it and I've planned strategically to insert it into my day, it's become part of my life. And so when we transition to talking about the book, we're going to find a very similar approach, certainly, which is starting small, building a habit, consistency over intensity, making time. All of those things are how we achieve our goals. So yeah, that's a really cool connection that you've made.
I did not do that on purpose. I just thought that I read a lot of the book that really did focus on setting goals. And then I kind of thought about what we had talked about. And I'm still working on it, I promise, about actually setting goals to self-care. And then I really liked how you said that you do take walks before and then sometimes throughout the day. And so I'm like, well, that's just so... like what, 15 minutes, 10 minutes that you do, it's doable. So it's definitely something that as you work through it in self-care, but then connecting it to the book, setting goals is achievable. That's kind of what my take on that. So now let's take a closer look at the book as it pertains to student learning. How influential is self-assessment to the cognitive development of a student?
Oh man, this is a tough one to answer succinctly. Except here's my succinct answer. It is incredibly essential. But I feel like, children are human beings, adults are human beings. So we're all walking our own journeys through this world. And when we are little people, we understandably are doing the hard work of focusing on ourselves, right? So our worlds feel pretty small. We've got our family and we've got the things we do. And then as we grow up, we start to become more aware of the people around us and our impact, the impact of our actions on others and the impact of others' actions on us. And then eventually we become citizens of the world. And so to me, that natural progression through broadening our horizons and understanding who we are is just a really critical part of learning. That's really what learning is about. And so where self-assessment fits in all of this is it positions students to do some intentional reflection. I mean, I think humans naturally reflect all the time, but this is an intentional academic focused reflection where they can sort of think about the challenges and the discomfort they're experiencing as part of learning. They can process it, they can strategize, they can stretch. And ultimately, our goal, I think, for all of us when children leave our system or when young adults leave our system is that they're independent and they have agency to make good decisions for themselves and they have resilience to walk through the difficult patches. And so to me, developmentally, self-assessment is not really a frill. It's something that we have to do as part of developing, whole, full, reflective people, which is exactly what we want, I think.
Everybody that I've ever met as a teacher has always had an incredible heart, and that is who they are. So they are such a huge impact in who that person is going to be to, like you said, to be part of society, who they're going to present themselves to be as a person. So that's...
Well, exactly. Wow. And I think we're trying to develop kids intellectually. We're trying to help them develop the skills that are within our goals and all of those things. That's never for question. But how we choose to develop those skills and understandings, the methods that we choose will impact the level of independence that students eventually develop, their level of confidence, their comfort with risk-taking, all of those really important things. And so our job, like you've just said, is not just dissemination of information, it's the development of a whole person through the context of learning. And so when we insert self-assessment into that learning process, the byproduct is like better than the knowledge they get in lots of ways, right? Yeah, it's powerful.
That's a lot that teachers have to take on. It's incredible. I admire it on a huge level. So there's a part of the book that says when we, as educators, ask students to keep track of their learning in notebooks, portfolio, or computer files, as we are in the new age of technology, we do encourage the creation of artifacts that reflect who these students are at moments in time. So why is it so important to document a student's growth from their point of view? And then also, does present-day technology interfere or benefit the reflection of self? Because we know Instagram and TikTok and all that.
I know. What a good question. I love this question. So, okay. So regarding why it's important to document and analyze sort of our progress in learning from the student's point of view, the short answer again is because it's their journey. And so anytime, this is just something to think about as teachers or parents for that matter, anytime we make decisions for children and youth, we are asserting our view and our understanding on them. And that's part of mentoring people. Our job, we hold knowledge that our little people don't hold. So I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but when that's all we do and students never get a chance to document things that matter to them, to create artifacts of learning that represent, all of those things that are going on inside their heads, it's hard to get a robust view of what's happening with students in terms of their thinking, but it also positions teachers as the decision makers all the time, which again is going to take us away from that independence and that agency that we're really working towards. So when students are able to make decisions, when they can curate the things that they're going to include in a portfolio or a data notebook, when they can think about how their learning is developed, why does today's writing look better than writing I did a month ago? When I compare them, where have I grown? It really increases, again, all of those really important subsidiary skills that we're trying to develop. And the other thing that I talk about in the book briefly, that I'm not going to get into a huge amount, but just is, I also like the idea of students taking ownership for this, because they are whole people who deserve to have boundaries. So what that means to me is that there are times in children and youth's lives where it's okay for them to say, this is something that matters to me. This is something that I'm choosing. This is something I want to relate to, and for us to respect and honor that. And so I just like the idea of kids being part of that. Teachers can't be the focus all the time, because it sets up that unhealthy relationship between teachers and students, where teachers are going to do all of the thinking and kids just have to jump through that hoop. Now, part B of your question was around technology. Whew. So I just have two thoughts about this, but probably a million behind it, but I'm just going to say two things because you really made me think. So I think part of the reason why I like this being part of an in-school process is that we have a chance to help children understand that their analysis of the value of something, in the case of school, an artifact, a product, or performance, or something like that, depends on evidence. So we can say that something's strong or something needs strengthening, but we always have to connect it back to evidence. So what evidence do we have? What was the success criteria? How do we know this was good? Or how do we know that we need to improve this? When I think about kids and Instagram or TikTok or all of those things where they're perhaps engaging in that kind of analysis about themselves, I just think it's a lovely opportunity for us to say, hey, when you get an impression of the value of something, including yourself, let's think about the criteria that we're using to judge that thing. Let's look for evidence of that. And let's be as real and honest about that as possible. I think it's part of that digital literacy and that whole self-image conversation that's important to have. And that's like a super short answer to a fantastic question.
They're so used to instant gratification, instant results. Yes. Now, when they are being held accountable, do they feel like, I'm going to get it right the first time? Because, I feel like I totally can't even imagine.
They totally do. That was my number one challenge with my kids last year, was that they thought that because they finished it, they were done. And I would say, hold on, let's look at the quality of it. You handed in 2 sentences for a multi-paragraph essay. So I know that you checked it off your list, but I know you can do more than this. And you're absolutely right. The once and done and the completion and compliance mentality is an epidemic. It's terrible. So yeah, I do think that this slows us down and says, no, we're not accountable to quantity or speed. We're accountable to quality.
Yes.
That's what matters, right? In our relationships, in everything that we do, it's about the quality of those things, not the quantity or the speed with which they happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, no, and I actually think it's a really important thing that you said, because I'm thinking about how I just worry so much about kids' perceptions of who they are and what value they hold and how they feel like they have to change themselves. And adults too, we only share the best of our best stuff. And so then that leads everyone to believe that life is polish. And I just feel like self-assessment can help us become grounded again in the idea that life is messy. There's good and there's bad. There's days where we look beautiful and there's days where we look like a hot mess, and that's okay. That's part of being human. And I just really worry that we're losing touch with reality a little bit, and judging ourselves harshly as a result of it, which makes me so sad. So yeah, you got me thinking about that. Like, I don't think this will be the last time I talk about that, because I think that's really important. Yeah, I know.
Good. So you've been able to observe in teaching, you've been able to observe students in their home environment, due to the pandemic, because you can see them, if they allow you to see them through their camera. You do get to kind of still have some sense of their home environment through that. But also, while they're in that, they have to kind of function and code switch to thinking in their school mindset.
Mhm.
So, what are the main factors you've observed that distract students from setting their goals during that time, and even now, if whether they're still at home or not?
Like there's lots of things. Like what's interesting to me is human beings have social codes depending on where they are, right? And we very intuitively, all of us, behave differently in certain circumstances than in others. And where I found the pandemic, like I taught online, is I found that it was tough for kids to regulate, like you say, code switch, to go from one to the other. It was tough because for many of my students, there were really heavy pulls towards things that quite frankly did feel more important, like they had baby siblings in the background crying who they needed to attend to, right? Or they have parents who are working full time and they're trying to manage, and or people fighting for bandwidth, because I live in a rural Canada. We don't just have access to Wi-Fi easily, and so all of those things that were distracting. So I think there was the overarching pull between school and life, which I think is valid. I think adults feel it right now too. But also, when I think about self-assessment, I think about these are just some things to consider. When kids are setting goals outside of school, so they're playing video games, or they're dancing or cooking, or they're playing soccer. Kids set goals all the time. I feel like there's some factors that are a little bit different. Like, first of all, outside of school, the motivation for setting a goal is clear, right? They want to get to the next level on a video game, or they want to, make a meal that's edible. But inside school, sometimes when we invite students to set goals, they're just not clear why, especially when traditionally teachers have made those decisions. And so in order for a student to buy into the idea that setting a goal will have a purpose, they have to feel the results of it, right? They have to experience the consequences of it. They have to see that their instruction has changed somehow as a result of it, and their learning is manifesting. And so I think that that's a valid disconnect that we probably have to bridge as adults, is why are we doing this? And then who are we doing this for? Am I setting a goal for you, my teacher, or is this my goal? Or, I have to share it with a partner. So am I setting it for them? So there's that sort of lack of clarity. There's also like, how does goal setting feel different in school than it does outside of school? So, my daughter is a dancer. And so when she sets goals, I mean, it's very emergent and organic, and part of like, I just danced, and so now let's talk about what's going to happen next time we do this. In school, it can feel stilted sometimes. Like, everyone stop, here's a handout, fill it out. It's like, what does this have to do with what we're doing? So I feel like we have to really work at making it more organic and natural. And then, like, what happens if I am not successful, I think, is a valid question that kids would ask inside school. So if I don't achieve my goal, what's going to happen? And outside of school, it's very clear what happens. You don't get to your next level, or your supper is burnt, or, you don't win the dance competition. And so I think that part of our work in helping students have this become part of a natural part of their learning process is to embed it within the learning cycle instead of doing it at the end, and to make sure that kids are part of the decision making, and that they experience success and sometimes challenge as a result of decisions they've made. And I think that that's really powerful. So those are just some of the things that I think make this challenging for students, and also how we might turn around and make it better for them.
But that's a huge strategy to actually have them be involved as a decision maker, because that way, could that actually help them not feel so disillusioned or not accomplished when they don't manage to get something right. Because I feel like sometimes some students might not want to try because they failed in front of the class, or didn't get an answer correct. So the fact that the implementation of setting them as part of the decision making alongside the teacher, and not the teacher just throwing things, I really appreciate that about the book, that part.
That's good, because that's a huge part of it. I think of a specific example where I had a student, we were doing an extended writing, and the student said to me, Mrs. White, why do I have to do a draft and an outline? Like, I feel like I could just sit at the computer and type my story. I know what I want to say. Now, as a teacher, my alarm bells were going, no, you have to plan before you write. I know this to be true. But I said to the student, you know what? Let's try it. Why don't you sit down for 10 minutes, type, and then we're going to stop and let's have a look at the components of a good story. And let's see if your beginning fills those components. So you need to have a powerful introduction, a compelling thesis, so let's see how that's going for you. And so they just did. They appreciated it. They sat down, they typed. And when they came back and we compared it to the success criteria, they themselves were able to say, oh, I see that I just started to tell the story and I didn't do an introduction. And I was like, okay, so that's one of the reasons why sometimes outlining or drafting can help us. It can help us before we get too far in, but it's not too late and you can go back and do that. And so it became a conversation or a negotiation between the two of us about how that was going to work, as opposed to what I was tempted to do was say, no, I said an outline, you do an outline. And I just think that that's a gentler and actually more impactful way of doing it. If we have the freedom to offer those choices, let's give it a try. It was a safe space. If the student wasn't successful, it wasn't the end of the world. It was 10 minutes. And they actually had some stuff that was usable, so it wasn't a waste of time, but they felt in control of the decision.
Yes. And then also they don't feel like they did something wrong, but you empowered them with that ability. So I think that's a great.
Let's try it. That's my phrase. Let's try it. See if it's going to work. I don't know. Maybe it will. Doesn't work for me, but maybe it'll work for you. Sure.
That's good. I like that. I really like that one. So this book provides research on self-assessment, obviously, strategies that can be utilized for every grade level, which I thought was great that it covers that. Granted, students do have retention of information. It varies upon age, but it in general. But what are some effective strategies that motivate student engagement throughout the spectrum of all grades, if there is any?
Yeah, there are some. So first of all, make time. So what I would say is within your learning cycle, like even if I look at my day's lesson, like when I sub, I go in and I look at what the teacher has asked me to accomplish. And then I ask myself, where in here could I insert a moment where we pause and we reflect and set an intention, right? And it doesn't take a lot of time, but it is an intentional making of time to do that. But here's the second part. If we're inviting students to make decisions, then I think it's really important that we also make time for them to recover from mistakes. Because if I'm going to create a space where a student can make a choice or a decision, they're going to try it. It would not be fair of me to just barge ahead. Like the example I just gave, like if the student came to me and I said, well, this isn't good enough, but you're out of time, so you got to hand it in. I mean, that's not fair. So then I want to be able to say, but you know what? The good news is we have another 15 minutes. So you can head back in and add those parts. And so, but I think we have to make time for it. And sometimes teachers understandably feel the pressure to move from one thing to the next. But I honestly know that if we build in time to pause and set intention and then reflect on the consequences of those intentions or those actions we've taken, it will benefit kids and their work. The things we get back from them will be better as a result of it. And so that's one thing. The second thing is to model it. I mean, explicitly model it, because here's an example. Lots of times we can tell students, we can help them with their goals. So we can say, you know what, you need to attend to this criteria, but students don't have strategies for doing that. Like they They understand that this aspect of whatever it is they're doing isn't proficient yet, but they don't know how to get from where they are now to where we want them to be. So modeling strategies, brainstorming, I wonder what we could do. How might we try this is really helpful. And then the third thing I would say is, for our littlest people, but also for, I taught high school last year and those kids needed help too. Practice goal setting and strategy design and reflection and response on things that are familiar and meaningful to kids first, because then it becomes a natural part, like they're invested, they care, they feel confident. And so the stakes aren't quite as high. And then we can start to build to those things that are more complex and more difficult. So start with the familiar and move out. In the book, I just want to make a little plug for this. In the book, I talk about the sub skills of self-assessment, especially in the last chapter when I talk about doing this with your youngest learners. So with our littlest people, we might not, work all the way through the process in one fell swoop. We just have to. So what we might do is just spend some time on the sub skill of noticing and describing. So what did you notice just happened? Describe to me what you just saw, so that we can start. I think of it as exercising all of those muscles that will let them become good self-assessors eventually. So those smaller but really important skills. Another one that often doesn't get mentioned but is important is self-forgiveness. That's a sub skill, because lots of students struggle to set goals because they're afraid that if they fail, they're not okay. And so teaching them to forgive themselves when they make mistakes, because that's part of the human condition, is a really nice sub skill to focus on when people are really little or really inexperienced with this.
And if we admire our teachers so much, or students admire teachers so much, they would feel so down if they did not accomplish something that they think that, like they're not going to think the same way about me. So I think that is such a valuable, definitely. If it's not already in place somewhere, definitely please place it in your teaching. All right. So then this book, like you mentioned, does have useful scenarios. Some describe ways to structure safe classroom spaces. And then so does this class environment. So does class environment need to be established first for students to then feel at ease to analyze their decisions? And then also, does it need to be established first to just learn in general?
Yes and no. So yeah, all my answers are like that. They're all great. Yes, because I think it's always healthy to start with relationship. We're in relationship with children and adolescents, and so we have to build that. And that's critical. And that's going to go a long way to establishing that safe space. And so I wouldn't say like that there's an order of operations to these things. I think that through self-assessment, by inviting students to set goals and make decisions and reflect on their progress and document their learning, it can be used as fuel for creating a safe space, right? So it's almost the result, when we have a safe space, then we can self-assess, but it's also through self-assessment that we create a safe space. Because when we give kids a chance to make a decision, to recover from decisions, to celebrate those decisions that were strong, we're using the process of self-assessment to build a classroom culture as well. So the two go hand in hand. Yeah.
So then there's so much useful information in this book. I truly had an experience reading it. So from introducing, the notion of self-assessment to students, their investment to learning, I really like that part. Holding them accountable, which is kind of what I took from the investment of learning. And then so much more. What is your advice on the best way to use this book as a tool for their toolbox, speaking to our new educators and also experienced educators who are listening?
As a writer, of course, I think, well, I laid things out in an order, so I'd like you to start at the beginning and work your way through, right? Because that's a writer talking. But here's what I would say. The chapters are organized in an order. The order is intentional. So, starting with documentation, students can't self-assess until they have artifacts, products, performances, videotapes, photos, things to look at, right? That makes their analysis, that makes them grounded in evidence, which is really important. So start with documentation. Then we can move into analysis, which is the next chapter. And then we can move into imagining different outcomes and setting goals. And then we can move to celebration. So there's a specific order. So wherever you are feeling like, do your own self-assessment. Where do you feel like it would make sense to invest a little bit of time? Pop to that chapter. So if you've got documentation covered, analysis is flowing, but celebration sounds different. Like what are some ways we could celebrate? You could just pop right to that chapter and do that. In each chapter, there's lots of background information about things you should know before you engage in it, but there's templates, there's reflection questions, there's scenarios. So there's lots of ways to engage. So you don't have to read it front to back, but you don't, but more just decide where you'd like to spend a little bit of time and focus there. And I think a chapter could stand on its own for sure.
And lastly, what is the take that you want people, the ultimate take, if there's the one, maybe three things one or three things that you kind of want to have people take away from this book?
Children are capable. Learning is better when it's co-constructed and shared in partnership. And self-assessment builds humans.
Right.
There we go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been so great. I just love your energy. So I definitely can see that reflecting in the book, the energy, the passion for education that you have. We do appreciate your time for being here with us. Thank you so much for just such an intriguing conversation about these self-assessment tools, that can establish an impact in students' short-term and long-term goals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much for the interview. Thank you for saying I still seem passionate. I often say I'm going to sit on my hands and not be as giggly, but this is just who I am. So you got the whole Katie White today. That's for sure. Thank you, Prisma, for your thoughtful questions. I really appreciate them.
This book is without a doubt another tool for your toolbox with teaching. It certainly is a stimulating book in that each chapter you'll find helpful step-by-step guidelines as well as questions to guide and reflect throughout the journey of reading this book, but then also through your journey of implementing these strategies into your teaching. This book is available on the Solution Tree website, solutiontree.com. Look for Students Self-Assessment. To learn more about her work and to request Katie White for professional development guidance, look for her page on her website by searching Katie White. At Solution Tree, we share your vision to transform education to ensure learning for all, and we can help you make this vision a reality. No other professional learning company provides our unique blend of research-based, results-driven services that improve learning outcomes for students. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure to navigate to our solutiontree.com/podcast page to listen to our other episodes. There you can also subscribe to our podcast today via the subscribe button where you can find your favorite podcast app. Also, remember to like our episodes, including this one, and subscribe to our Solution Tree YouTube channel. This has been your host, Prisma Lopez Marine. Thank you for joining us and for listening to our podcast, Charting New Paths in Pre-K to 12 Education.